Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. I was going to leave it at the last one, not respond to Improve Sheffield with an actual video for round two, but I just feel compelled to share my views, and then we can call it good on that, and then perhaps him and I can go back and forth once again and continue this discussion because I think it's very valuable and it's very important, like I've said before. So in this video, I had some criticism, which I appreciated, that I didn't support so much the arguments that I made about the FDA being responsible for the EpiPen problems. And it is a combination of issues. It's not just the FDA, but the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, is part of the reason why EpiPen was able to establish a monopoly. But it goes even deeper than that. There's a lot of lobbying that went on with the company to get EpiPens required in many schools in the United States, and in response to tragedies of people passing away with not having the EpiPen. So there's a number of reasons there. So I'll try to provide some of those links in the comments, or sorry, in the description of this video, to show some supporting evidence or arguments for the FDA being involved in producing a monopoly in relation to the EpiPen. But it's also connected to it is patent laws and intellectual property that reserves and creates and contributes to monopolies as well. So there's concern that was expressed by Improve Sheffield about the individualism of myself and my views and the United States. And I think the confusion is that just because a person is focused on personal responsibility or taking responsibility or encouraging people to be independent or self-reliant, they have no regard for the wider community or have no regard for those who make mistakes or who make poor decisions. And it's just not true. And what I've put it down to is I think that perhaps our differences between Sheffield and I is where we place responsibility. I personally place it at the feet of the individual because it is the individual that is making decisions. And I think that Improve Sheffield, correct me if I'm wrong, you place the responsibility on the government. The government has the ultimate responsibility to take care of us and to be responsible for our decisions. And even the ones that we make that are poor, the poor decisions that we make as well. You also talked about you tried to make a case for contraceptives. And I've heard it many times before when I've had these discussions that it's actually cheaper if you are to provide contraceptions for young people, say, that in the long run you will save money on having to obviously take care of the baby or pay for any sickness or disease that comes from venereal diseases and things like that. And I totally understand it. And you also mentioned condoms being so cheap. But I think that actually adds to my argument, and that if condoms are so cheap, why can't we place the responsibility at the feet of the person who is making the decision to have a relationship with somebody? The condom costs $1.50. What is so absurd about saying and stressing that individuals have the responsibility with their reproductive powers to make good decisions with those powers? I don't see the problem with encouraging that responsibility because who has to deal with the consequences? Even when it comes to an abortion, a woman has to go to the hospital and has to endure the procedure. They have to have the discussion with their family members and with the doctor, and it's not a pleasant experience. So why shouldn't we encourage more responsibility? That is the question that I have. And it seems to me, as I mentioned, that your responsibility, the responsibility you place, is on the government. And I think when it comes to life and the life that we have, the decisions that we make, good and bad, we can't have this mentality that is, oh, don't worry about it, the government will take care of me, or the government will support me, or the NHS will pay for it. I don't think that is a good mentality to have. I think it is better, as an ideal, to encourage personal responsibility first. Now, I mentioned as well, this is furthering the discussion about idealism. And Improve Sheffield has said that I'm an idealist and that it is a cause of mental health problems in the United States. and that it is far better to practice British pragmatism. But to be honest, I don't see how pragmatic that thinking is. I am aware that people make poor decisions, just as much as anyone else. But I don't think we should cater or change the system to suit the least common denominator. What is wrong with chasing an ideal? And it's not chasing an ideal to try to form some utopia. That is not a possibility. There are no utopias in my view, and I'm not trying to create one. The question is, how can we make the best possible situation or circumstances with the realities that we have before us, with the realities of life that are challenging and complex? I think it is better to hold a standard up there, to have something that people can aspire and aim towards. If you have that, more people will get there, in my view, rather than what I think is your perspective, Improve Sheffield, which is the reality, facing the realities that not everyone will hit that mark. And there are many who won't, that is true. But if we can have as many people as possible aiming for some kind of ideal, more people will get there. And as I mentioned before, I think your idea of pragmatism is to say, oh, well, we have X amount of people who won't, um, get a job, for example, and can't pay for themselves. So we need to adjust for everybody else to make it possible for that person to have health insurance. So we're going to pay for it for them. And for example, in the United States, I would say your solutions are catering to the 8% of the population that don't have health insurance in the United States. Whereas my thinking is, how can we include the 91.2% who already have health insurance in the United States? How can we bring them into this? Yeah, so I wonder about your idea of pragmatism. And that's a whole discussion in itself, because I understand the idea and the concept, accepting the realities, what is most pragmatic about the situation. And I think we can go a bit deeper on that and talk about it more. But anyway. Now, your suggestion that the mental health in the United States is an issue because of the idealism that we have, and that many people won't aspire to it. I totally agree in some respects, because there's people that I've seen in the United States who are told, for example, you can be anything that you want to be when you grow up. Is that a reality? It happens for some. But I think that's advice that you give to a young person. You give a young person that advice to open up their minds, that they might consider what is possible for them. But as they mature and as they develop, you bring in the realities. You look at their strengths and their weaknesses. You look at their talents. And then you contrast that to what is available in the market. You look at what they're interested in. And then you start to zero in. You start to focus on what is actually possible for that person. Now, there are some people who don't have that kind of guidance. And there's people who, with no artistic talent, for example, they just flock to Los Angeles with that dream that they're going to make it. And of course, some do. But those that make it are those who have the talent, who have the ability. But there are many others who don't achieve it. So I think we need to, as you suggested, contrast our idealism with some reality. And I think most people do in the United States. Mental health is a serious issue across the globe and across the Western world. And they are issues that we need to address. And I think if Jordan Peterson's arguments, which I think you have explored a little bit in Improve Sheffield just by the language that you use, perhaps not, I'm not sure. But some of the arguments that he has made is that young people aren't given any responsibility in the world. They're told their rights, but they are never told what their responsibilities are. And I would say that's led to some, lack of mental health in the youth and in people today. And the second that Jordan Peterson comes along and says, clean your room, take some responsibility for yourself, he had a positive response from that from many young people, especially men who are known to have serious mental health problems. So is it idealism that leads to mental health? I don't think so. I think idealism or personal responsibility can actually be very, very rewarding for people, and it can give them something to focus on that can actually lead to developing their lives in a way that is favorable and that is ideal, or at least more ideal, or as ideal as we can get it in this imperfect world. Now, the part that really got to me was when you started talking about the history of the United States and Jim Crow, etc., and slavery. Now, I understand the history of the United States, and there are some serious issues that happened, and we are still dealing with those issues today. And I commend the British for the enlightenment that you received when it came to you, because you were on the front lines actually fighting against slavery and the slave ships around Africa. And I appreciate the Renaissance and the enlightenment that came from the British at that time. And it didn't come in the United States for a very long time, and there's still some issues that we are dealing with today. But I think you should give the US more credit than you are giving it. We have been through a lot in the United States dealing with the issues of slavery and Jim Crow, etc., and we have come a very long way. And I think those are separate issues to what we were talking about in relation to healthcare. And perhaps you make the case to embolden the image of the UK. And you even suggested that the United States should take a lesson. Take a lesson from the countries that have been around for far longer. But I honestly don't think that argument holds, Improve Sheffield, because the mindset and the thinking that led to the NHS in the 1940s, I think it's been around for 70 years, if I'm not mistaken, 70 plus years, only came around post-World War II. And based on my understanding, it came from Labour Party thinkers who, with they're not ashamed to admit it, have more socialist leanings in the UK. I'm pretty sure Jeremy Corbyn admits to being a socialist. And I think the ideals of socialism, say, or communism, took hold to a much greater degree in the UK than they did in the United States. And don't get me wrong, I've done a video already about the United States and the shift that happened from the classical liberal perspective to what came about after World War II. And I talked about how America brought in this idea of having a freedom from want in the United States, which led to many policies, such as welfare policies, expansion of welfare policies to provide support to the poor and to reduce the want that they have. So we're not talking about an enlightened people from hundreds of years ago. We're talking about very new ideas, relatively new ideas that have just come about. So I don't think you can make the claim that there is superior, experience and knowledge in relation to this. It's a phenomenon that has occurred post-World War in many parts of the world, but it didn't catch on to the same degree in the United States. And what I'm trying to argue in most of my videos in relation to healthcare is that there's still a better way for the United States to move forward. And through these discussions, I'm confident that it will come out. But we shall see. So, by the way, I don't take offense to anything that you've said. I appreciate you actually making the comments that you're making. But I think there is more to be talked about, more to be discussed here. It's not as simple as the enlightened UK with the NHS. I think the NHS is experiencing a lot of problems that every country is experiencing. Perhaps with the mechanism of government control, you're better able to manage them. But I've looked at some charts and graphs, and the cost of the NHS is growing and has been growing since its inception. So that's a challenge that you deal with, and it's a challenge that the United States is dealing with. And how we go about dealing with it is different. It's going to be different. And I would argue that my view is a pragmatic view, because I'm coming from the perspective of considering what the culture is of the United States. The culture in the United States is not as collective as it is in Australia, as it is in the United Kingdom. So that being the case, taking that into consideration, I'm not going to just say that the Americans are brainwashed people or that they don't care about their poor. I'm not going to make those arguments. Those arguments have been made already. What I'm trying to say is that there is a more pragmatic approach that we can take in the United States that will connect with the people in such a way that suits their culture and their independent spirit and mindset. And I believe that solution can come forward if given time, if given debate and discussion, and if the political will of the people and if the collective understanding of the people increases, if their knowledge increases, if competition increases, the health system in the US can improve. I'm confident of that. So, once again, Mr. Sheffield, thanks for the discussion. I hope we can continue it. Maybe we can do a phone call sometime and talk about the differences between our various views. And I think it'll be a good back and forth to see how the ideas in the United States contrast to the ideas in the UK. Anyway, thanks very much, and I will talk to you soon.